Rick Santorum, also a front-runner, endorsed religious profiling during one of the GOP presidential debates, saying obviously Muslims would be someone you would look at. In January 2012, journalists brought attention to a lengthy Islamophobic rant Santorum gave in 2007. And listen to what he said. In order to defeat what he barely defined who the Muslim enemy was, but in order to defeat them, Americans must educate, engage, evangelize, and eradicate. Newt Gingrich, now help me with this quote, because I still haven't figured this one out. I heard somebody laugh, so I think you already know this quote. Whoa. He feared that his grandchildren, by the time they reach his age, will be in a secular, atheist country, potentially one dominated by radical Islamists, and with no understanding of what it once meant to be American. So it's a secular country dominated by religious people. That's an example of politicians just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what'll stick. The good news here, even the Republican Party's nominating process, which, if you've been watching the news, they've been talking about it a lot lately, it drives candidates far to the right. Even that nominating process didn't select those three guys. Alhamdulillah. That's good, but each one of them was a front runner. I'll focus on one more group. These are public interest groups, how they too are interested in making sure that Muslims do not get equal treatment. Brian Fisher of the Islamophobic American Family Association, he believes the First Amendment does not apply to Muslims. This is what he writes. Islam has no fundamental First Amendment claims for the simple reason that it was not written to protect the religion of Islam. Got me on that one, dude. Similar to Fisher, a lawyer who was opposing a mosque expansion in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And if you guys haven't heard about the mosque in Murfreesboro, you should read their story. These people are so inspiring. Their mosque has been shot at, burned, vandalized. They've been sued. They've been gone after personally. And they persevered. They just opened it recently. During the lawsuit, the lawyer who was trying to stop the expansion of the mosque argued that Islam is not a religion and therefore not protected by the First Amendment. Now, the federal government actually intervened in this one. They filed a brief arguing, yes, Islam is a religion. And we appreciate that very much. Let me not get anybody confused. But isn't it surreal that the government actually had to do that? We had to have an argument. One of the world's greatest religions. Am I doing a Rudy Giuliani here? No, that's somebody else. One of the world's great religions, according to lawyers are attempting to say, it's not a religion. The Oak Initiative, another group whose name pops up all the time in association with anti-Islam religion or legislation, through its mouthpiece, a guy named Lieutenant General William Jerry Boykin. They say, this is what Boykin says, Islam should not be protected under the First Amendment, and there should be no mosques in America. The last group I'll pick on, the Family Leader, is an Iowa-based conservative Christian group. They asked GOP presidential candidates to sign a marriage vow. I don't know why it was called a marriage vow. I have to read the whole thing again at some point. That proclaimed their opposition to Sharia Islam. Now, it's in its original form, this pledge also contained troubling language regarding African Americans. It made the national news for a while. You might have heard about it. This is what it originally said. Slavery had a disastrous impact on African American families. Yet sadly, a child born into slavery in 1860 was more likely to be raised by his mother and father in a two-parent household than was an African American baby born after the election of the USA's first African American president. So these guys are trying to make an argument that somehow African Americans, hey, at least both of your parents were there while you were slaves. Which is not true, by the way. They broke up families constantly. And yet, that was removed, but one would think that would make the organization somewhat radioactive. Reasonable? Michelle Bachmann, Rick Santorum, Rick Perry all signed the vow. What else can we look at as challenge as Muslims being on the front lines of upholding the Constitution? So we've talked about anti-Islam legislation. We've talked about them trying to roll back Article 6 of the Constitution. So let's pick on Peter King for a little bit. I'm sure you guys heard about him out here, right? Yes?
Yes.
Good fun. He held a series of 5 anti-Muslim hearings, by the way. Everybody started ignoring him after the first one. The first one was considered one of the greatest religious news events of 2011. But for 7 years prior to that first hearing, he had maintained 2 kind of key allegations against the Muslim community. First, he says 80-85% of the leadership of the Muslim community is fundamentalist. Second, he says that Muslims are loyal, but they don't come forward. They won't turn in their own. Essentially, we don't cooperate with law enforcement. So throughout the hearings, CARE was there. We were one of those at the forefront of exposing his anti-Muslim sentiment. And if you watched the first hearing, man, did he spend a lot of time on us. They attacked CARE again and again and again and again. And I ran out of energy watching it after a while. But you know what? That means we were doing our job. We must have hit a nerve. Because let's face it, folks, you don't attack people who are irrelevant, right? You attack the people who are hurting you. So afterward, CARE produced the only comprehensive study of the first 4 hearings. I got sick of listening to it, so I decided, you know what, okay, great. You've had 18 witnesses now, Congressman King. Come and testify before your hearings. How did you do on those 2 theses that you put forward? Did you prove them? So I read the testimony twice, which was really boring, by the way. I watched the videos again, which is a little more exciting because there's some life. And what I found, his first allegation, 80-85% of the American Muslim leadership is fundamentalist, nobody tried to back that up. Not one single person tried to bring any kind of facts to back it up. He had one witness who said a couple of words a little bit, but no facts, no figures, nothing. So here you go. You have 5 hearings. You control what's said in the room. You can't prove your first thesis. The second one, talking about Muslims don't cooperate with law enforcement. He had 6 representatives of law enforcement testify before his hearings. 5 of them did not back him up. Instead, what they described is strong bonds with the American Muslim community, strong relationships with Somali Muslims, and outreach and engagement going on with Muslim communities. So, you had 5 hearings, sir. You managed to prove that you're definitely a blowhard, but you definitely did not prove that American Muslims are anything other than loyal, contributing members of this society. So this is all nothing new. Throughout the history of the United States, unfortunately, there's always been at least one minority that's being targeted. I mean, think about it. Even at the founding, when the Constitution was inked, it counted blacks as 3/5 of a human being and left them enslaved. Women did not get the right to vote in presidential elections until 1920. And even after slavery was ended, African Americans were subjected to treatment, horrible treatment, discriminatory laws. If anybody's ever studied Jim Crow, you know about those kind of things. But they didn't hide. Reverend Martin Luther King was wiretapped. Not many people really know that. In an FBI memo, he was referred to as the most dangerous and effective Negro leader in America. J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI at the time, referred to Martin Luther King as a degenerate. Today, they get Martin Luther King's birthday off as a federal holiday. I look at Japanese Americans as the best example for our community. They too were blamed for an attack on this country. They were put in internment camps, and I think we have to thank them that the same didn't happen to us. It's probably because of them that that didn't happen. They were vocal, they organized, and after 40 years of hard work, the government acknowledged what was done to them was wrong. So I'm hoping we can maybe do it a little faster, but we have a target in front of us. In fact, we inherit a rich tradition of standing up for an America that is based on a level playing field. That's what the Constitution establishes. Catholics were discriminated against. Jews were discriminated against. Mormons have been discriminated against. Each in turn has pushed back. It's simply our turn at this point. I guarantee you that at some point in time, the lens of bias and discrimination will turn to somebody else. If you're listening to the news right now, they're talking immigration reform is going to be on the table next year. You know what that means. You saw it in 2006. The Hispanic community is going to get railed against. We have to uphold the Constitution now because we owe it to the people who came before us and did their job. We don't want the people who come after us to go, the Muslims failed us. I have one final thought for you tonight. Have you signed me yet? No? All right. We are on time. When I got married, thinks about Muslims being on time. My wife is from Afghanistan. My family's all American. You're not going to clap for me in a second because it's kind of devious. So we sent the wedding invitations to my family, asking them to show up at 7 o'clock. We sent the wedding invitations to her family, asking them to show up at 5:30. You guys know the outcome. They all showed up at 7 o'clock. So a final thought. Before he became a prophet, Muhammad, peace be upon him, was known as Al-Amin, the trustworthy. He didn't lie. He kept his word. We as Muslims have to think about this. Most Americans were introduced to our faith on 9/11 watching airplanes slam into buildings. The images of Islam they got after that, repeated in the media again and again, was crazy guy in a cave threatening horrible death to them. We in this room know that such monstrosities are heretical. They have no place in Islam. They're not compatible with any understanding of Islam. We know Islam compels us to be trustworthy. But I wonder how many of our neighbors retain that image of planes and crazy. And when I say that, I don't mean here. I mean here in the emotional places where logic and reason don't mean anything. These are just these emotional things that we're based on, where fear resides. They may harbor even unwanted a concern that maybe the bigots who claim Muslims are an existential threat to America are right. We must, each as an individual, and hopefully in partnership with CARE, strive to become known in America as the trustworthy. We do that by upholding the Constitution for everyone. We do that by being a benefit to them and preventing harm from coming to them. I know you're committed to this idea. I pray you will join us in putting faith into action. Thank you very much for having me here tonight.